So this is going to sound like it's coming off a little differently because I felt like it would be prudent for me to be extra constructive. I spent the past like 5 minutes just formulating an entire bread tube essay in my head, as one does, you know. So we'll run through that. You know, I don't really cover anything Destiny related because, and this will never read as sincere to people who dislike me, but I find his antics annoying and boring now. But in this instance, you know, he has acted so spectacularly that I feel like there's actually a lesson that we can take from it, you know? Basically, there's been some rape apologism. We'll get to the specifics, but this isn't really about Destiny, I think. It's about the arguments and the way in which they're used and the attitude that you take towards them. So we'll dig into it, but I'm not going to be screaming about every bad thing Destiny's ever done because, for one, if you're in my community, you statistically don't like him anyway, and for two, he does a good enough job making himself look bad here, so piling on feels unnecessary. And also, for three, um, we can learn more from this than that, you know? Destiny had a bad take seems like the easiest lesson to get from this. But, yeah. Oh, and because I know this is going to be watched by people who don't like me from his community, I know the number one thing in their head is going to be, aren't you only taking a shot right now because he's got bad optics and you're taking advantage to attack him? To which the answer is, of course, I mean, yeah, like, yes, but I do think there's something useful we can get from this. And also, it's not just bad optics, it's just a bad take. So, you know, it like the only thing you could really say to this would be it's unfair to criticize Destiny's bad takes, which comes off like a kind of weirdly defensive thing to say about the world's second most talented debate streamer. Anyway, let's actually get to the content here because it's been filling up my Twitter feed for 24 hours. So basically, yesterday, a guy called Mindwaves, who I swear I remember at one point having good takes, did a quote tweet, as one does. So the original tweet reads as follows. A dude slipped his condom off during sex after I asked him to wear one this week, and it's been bothering me, but I was too awkward to say anything. Not even the first time this has happened. Stop doing this, men. And I agree. The term for this, by the way, is stealthing. When you say you're going to wear a condom but then don't, or slip the condom off, the term for that is stealthing. It's sexual assault. It's pretty unambiguously sexual assault. You know, I don't really think you can get around that. Mindwave's response, which was retweeted by Destiny here, that's his Twitter thing, was, if you knew he took the condom off and you couldn't even bring yourself to say anything, you shouldn't be having casual sex. So, there are a few problems with this, which I guess we can group into two categories. And we're going to see these categories filled over and over with takes from Destiny. One of them is that Mindwaves is presuming a lot here, just logically. Even if we're to strip aside, like, callousness, how do you know that she didn't realize the condom came off after the sex had concluded? How do you know there weren't extenuating circumstances that made her feel unsafe in mentioning the violation to the guy who has already clearly indicated that he's willing to break boundaries? You know, there are like a lot of circumstantial bits here that, like, obviously you can't tweet all context of everything ever because it's Twitter, right? But, you know, essentially this fits into the category of uncharitably framing the behavior of a victim to assume maximum stupidity on their part, which is a kind of rape apologism in itself because it ignores adjacent circumstances in order to frame things in a way which maximizes the culpability of the victim. It infantilizes them. It maximizes their wrongdoing, and thus proportionally minimizes the wrongdoing of others. Because a very easy follow-through you could have from this take would be, if you didn't even mention that you weren't comfortable with the condom being taken off, which you had mentioned earlier, how was the guy supposed to know you hadn't changed your mind, right? The natural follow-through from this is kind of, what was wrong with what the guy did if you couldn't even tell him? Maybe contextually he felt as though it was an acceptable thing to do and you just failed to. Basically, it's taking a situation that is unambiguously sexual assault and framing it in a way where you both get to blame the victim and you get to kind of negate the circumstances by which it's unambiguously assault. So anyway, that's category 1. I know this is a bit wordy, but we'll get to the root of it pretty soon, okay? The second bit here is that, for reasons which should, I think, be fairly obvious to you guys, this is incredibly callous. Like quote tweeting a person who is talking about how they were sexually assaulted, just to say like, you shouldn't be having sex if you can't handle it, you know? Now, callousness is something that Destiny and his community take a kind of pride in for what I like to call, Rick Sanchez reasons. Chat, stop spoiling. We'll get to all the talking points when we get to the talking points. We'll get to all the info when we get to the info. Shh. Kind of a Rick Sanchez syndrome, where people like to imagine that the reason they're disliked is because they're correct all the time, but they phrase things in a really abrasive way, and people take issue with the abrasiveness. Now, Destiny's fans praise themselves because they think they're smart enough to see past the optically difficult, rhetorically mixed behavior he engages in and see it for the true, distilled, factually, technically correct bit within. You guys understand what I'm talking about? This is, by the way, a kind of behavior that I engage in to an extent as well, so I'm speaking from experience here. It's sort of a kind of intellectual masturbation where it's fun to be the Rick Sanchez, but it's also fun to be the guy who realizes that Rick Sanchez is right. You understand? Because that means you're so much smarter than all the people who are just angry and offended and who are upset, and they're all so triggered, but you're so smart and you can see right through it. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because the principal defense that Destiny is about to engage in is one of technical correctness. Because here's the thing. Obviously, if you're going to be having sex with people, you should be able to make it clear when you're uncomfortable with something. That is obviously the case. That's fairly inarguable, I would say. The issue is that there are plenty of things that are obviously the case, inarguably good, which are nonetheless not appropriate responses to a situation in which a person has been sexually assaulted. For example, if you are at a club and you're flirting heavily with a guy, but then later don't leave with him because you weren't really that interested, and then he follows you home and rapes you, it is true, if you are being technically correct, that you maybe shouldn't have led them on, because that behavior can potentially increase the likelihood of retaliatory violence. Would that make it an acceptable thing to say to a person who had just been raped? Obviously not. Obviously not. Clearly, inarguably, objectively not. There are plenty of things, This is the classic, what was she wearing defense. Was the clothing appropriate to be walking around downtown? The answer to that, from, I think, most reasonable people, is that it doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is that in any set of circumstances where a person has been victimized, you can fixate on things the victim could have done to avoid being victimized. You always can find that. There's always something, even in the most inarguable, clear-cut ways, there's almost always something that you can do. The problem with bringing that up in certain contexts is that when you do this, you shift the attention of the conversation away from the wrong doing of the bad person and towards the perceived irresponsibility of the victim. Notice how the original tweet here was blaming a guy who sexually assaulted her. I would say that's a fairly straightforward person to blame in this situation. A guy sexually assaulted you, so you blame the person who sexually assaulted you. It seems straightforward to me. But Mind Waves, so wisely, reframes it. Now the conversation is about the responsibility of the victim. Now we're not talking about the behaviors and assumptions that lead guys to sexually assault. Now we're talking about whether or not being sexually assaulted and not confronting your assaulter makes you too juvenile to have sex. The fact of the matter is, folks, no matter how you slice it, there is nothing you can do to completely eliminate the possibility of you being victimized. You can have women carry pepper spray. They can wear burqas all around downtown. They can be incredibly chaste around men, and sometimes it just won't matter. They can be incredibly clear and specific with their desires. They can be very forthcoming, direct, open. They can make sure that when they lay on the bed, they're on the side that puts them within arm's reach of the pepper spray. But you can't completely eliminate the chance that you might be victimized. And the reason for that is because at the end of the day, the reason people are victimized is because there are abusers. That's it. That is, at the end of the day, that's the point. Now, people defending Destiny and My Waves, the natural response here, actually there are two. One is to defend them, one is to attack me. The attack against me, in this case, would be, Vaush, you don't have the best history on this yourself, which is, of course, a whataboutism, but the reason I bring this up is because when scrolling through Destiny's Twitter feed, I saw that he literally did that. Like, not even in response to me saying anything, but just a person who likes me, the Dreamleaf person. So, you know, that's sort of a reflexive defense there. The irony is that for years, most people who dislike Destiny don't directly address the arguments that he's made. Instead, they just attack adjacent characteristics. And as a person who's known Destiny and been in his community for a long time, there are so many things you could ignore his points to attack him over. But I'm going after his points here. So I guess that makes me the logical one. Outpaced, etc., etc. That's the attack, you know. The defense here is that technically, Mind Waves, and as we're about to see, Destiny, never actually say that what the guy did was okay, which isn't really the point, because we all know that it's wrong to ask women what they were wearing when they talk about being sexually assaulted, but when you ask a woman, what are you wearing, what were you wearing, you're not saying they weren't sexually assaulted. You're implicitly putting the blame on them for being sexually assaulted. That's victim blaming, right? So are we just okay with that now? No, of course not. This falls under the purview of technical correctness, where, and if this comes off as like really obvious, the reason I'm repeating it is because, well, I know you guys know this, but Destiny will selectively forget or remember this, depending on whether or not it's convenient to him. So just to make sure that we're all on the same page, being correct in terms of the things you're saying are factually true does not mean that what you're saying is right. The easiest example of this is, of course, black crime statistics. Many a Stormfront copy pasta have I seen, which do nothing but pull data from fairly reliable sources. The problem is the implication crafted by the selection of that information. No. In fact, this is a really favored tactic by bigots in general, where transphobes will often attack trans people not by making explicit moral statements, but by talking about trans suicide statistics. People who are racist won't just out and about say black people are bad, they'll just bring up black crime statistics. People who hate Muslims won't just come out and make a moral argument against Muslims. They'll talk about Muslim rape statistics, which, as it turns out, mostly ended up being made up anyway. But the point that I'm getting at is, and we should all know this, saying things which are technically correct uh, doesn't actually mean that you're right. So you can say this is a technically correct statement all you like, ignoring the fact that there are circumstances you might not be aware of that make this come off as presumptuous, but that wouldn't make it right. Um, Thankfully, we have plenty more examples to pull from. So, if you will allow me, I have been talking about Destiny without showing what Destiny has actually said. So Capri pointed out it's funny that Destiny would take the position that he has on this when in the past he said that a trans person not disclosing their genitalia to a potential hookup is tantamount to rape. To this, Destiny says, if you are noticing someone is taking a condom off and can't say anything, you probably don't have the emotional maturity to engage in sex. You should probably just grab a caretaker or something and stick to masturbating to furry porn. Sorry. So I think that obviously this ignores a lot of potential circumstances of the original tweet that Mindwaves was quote tweeting. Additionally, I think that there's a lot being left on the table here. I don't think, or I should say, I don't expect people to always respond very well to being sexually assaulted. I think it's very callous and essentially rape apologism to say that if you don't have a perfect response to being sexually assaulted, you're not mature enough to engage in sex. I am a big guy, and I still feel like if somebody violated my consent in that way, or if I was being, say, ridden while wearing a condom, and then they took my condom off and just continued to have sex with me, I'd say I wasn't paying attention for a moment or whatever. That's a difficult situation to maneuver around. Destiny's still operating under the impression that the condom was taken off mid or at the beginning of sex. But again, what if it had happened afterwards? What if she only realized that he had taken the condom off after he came in her and potentially, impregnated her or STI risks or what have you? He doesn't know, but he's assuming because the assumption gives him the power to engage in victim blaming. And then we have this clarification. Sorry, I want to apologize for my last tweet. You should treat every single woman you come across like a retarded child who's incapable of voicing an opinion about literally anything. Ideally, you would bring her dad along to every fuck so he can guide her through the process. Now, the logical failure here, of course, is that nobody was suggesting anyone do this, only that it's not appropriate to tell a person who's been sexually assaulted that they're not mature enough to engage in sex because the way in which they responded to being sexually assaulted was what you considered to be not ideal. Sometimes it can be quite dangerous to tell a man that you are having sex with that you're not happy with something they're doing. But this just isn't any guy, right? This is a guy who's already sexually assaulting you. This is a person who is demonstrating through their behavior that they are extremely willing to ignore your boundaries. Uh, you know, and I feel like Destiny should know this because I've seen in his stream before him talking about how much more potentially dangerous men can be to hook up with, which is a good point to keep in mind. Relative differences in physical strength. I don't think that he's ignorant of this. I think that it's just inconvenient for him to take it into account while he's on his rage tirade. But we've got plenty more to go through here. So Know Nothing says, she specifically asked the dude to wear a condom, and then in the middle of sex, he took it off without telling her. There's a big difference between saying that the dude should have asked for consent and saying he should treat her like she's, quote, a retarded child. To which Destiny responds, she literally said, quote, it felt awkward, end quote, to watch a guy stealth her? Just voice an opinion. Have a little bit of agency over your life. You don't have to be a victim all the time. This person was sexually assaulted, the person he's referring to. And you sure as fuck can't expect to be treated like an adult if you won't act like one. So you're acting like a child now because you were sexually assaulted and you didn't then confront the person assaulting you. See, if Destiny were her, he would have simply not gotten assaulted. He's built different. He would have simply not been raped. That was his masterful, retort there. Again, there are going to be people in his community who watch this. He'll probably watch this on his stream, who think that this is just. Well, they have a habit of treating all legitimate criticism of Destiny as just like angry people getting offended. They want to believe that everyone to Destiny's Rick Sanchez is like a Jerry, like people who are just sort of inanely offended at his superior intelligence. But I hope that if you're still capable of critical thinking, these are just bad arguments. They are, let's be clear, stupid. These are arguments that you would expect to see from a just not very bright person. They're just sort of stupid. You can leave the morals aside. Clearly, that's not the operative issue here. They're just dumb. And they contradict info that he knows, and you know he knows. So, anyway, plenty more. Don't worry. So we have this person who tweeted and then was retweeted. Nothing Destiny or Mindwave said has to do with the dude. What he did was fucked up, of course. See, there's the defense right there. They're victim blaming, sure, but they're not saying it wasn't sexual assault. What they're saying is that if you get into a shitty situation and you don't have the ability to communicate your discomfort, you probably shouldn't be having casual sex. This isn't hard. Again, the issue with this is that it's a very touch grass kind of take. I don't know, like, if this is just a unique experience to me, but I know a good number of women through high school and up who have been sexually assaulted. And it's not always easy to voice your discomfort in those situations. Leaving aside the potential for physical violence, which is always present when you're being sexually assaulted, these are just incredibly unnerving, difficult to maneuver situations. The response here, apparently the point that needs to be made, is that if you freeze up or can't defend yourself while being sexually assaulted, you shouldn't have casual sex at all. The implicit, suggestion here is that if you're a woman and you choose to have casual sex, but then are sexually assaulted and don't, I don't know, fight back, it's kind of on you because you engaged in irresponsible behavior. Now, they wouldn't say that they deserve it because that would be too explicit, the implicit point that they're making. But that's kind of what's being gotten at, right? So here's a tweet. Awkward basically just means weird. It's almost like people feel weird about suddenly being sexually assaulted and they can freeze up. That doesn't make them immature. I feel like this is a fairly understandable point to your average high schooler. This feels incredibly straightforward to me, but the response from Destiny is, if this is your reaction multiple times, then stop having casual sex. Why would you subject yourself to potential rapes that happen just because you feel awkward? So, I think this lays bare the contradiction in his thinking very, very clearly. He's saying right here that the rape took place because she didn't confront him. Now, leaving aside the fact that confronting a person who's in the process of sexually assaulting you can end violently, and that's its own can of worms, this does suggest that Destiny's under the assumption, even though no evidence was given to supply this assumption, that she is at fault. That if she hadn't reacted in the way that she had, she wouldn't have been sexually assaulted. The language here puts the blame on her pretty clearly, I would say, because it establishes a line of cause and effect where in his construction of this series of events, based again off a single tweet of some random person who we're talking about for some reason, her behavior is what led to the sexual assault, as opposed to, of course, the sexual assault leading to the sexual assault. This goes on for a while, these tweets, and they don't really get that much better. He essentially continues to double, triple, quadruple down on the whole, if you are to engage in casual sex, then you should be able to voice your discomfort. And the thing that makes this, all the more pointless is that the person who was originally quote tweeted again in response to Destiny. Dude, I've been actually raped, and saying no just made him rape me harder. I noticed what had happened after he pulled out, so she took note of the sexual assault after it had already taken place. It's not incomprehensible that I would rather just want to walk away from that situation than start a confrontation. So, essentially, all of the what-ifs that I've been laying out, so this is my secret tactic here because I knew about this beforehand, were true. Nothing she did outside of having some kind of phenomenal superhuman awareness of whether or not he was wearing a condom the entire sexual encounter could have prevented what had taken place. And personal experience has taught her that directly confronting people in the process of sexually assaulting you doesn't tend to end well when you're not physically stronger than they are. So, in a sane world, in a reasonable world, this would be the point where Destiny just apologizes, because being able to acknowledge and take account of your bad takes is a part of intellectual growth. This is, however, his greatest weakness. And I bring us now to the final thing that I want to look at, which is a 1-minute clip from Hans of Hakir's stream, in which he is, for the first time in a while, unambiguously the good guy. They're talking about the Twitter business.
If it happens 3 times and you can't say anything ever when it's happening and you're noticing it, then I mean, like, probably it's time to take a step back from casual sex. Like,
maybe she did. Maybe she did take steps, and then she like trained, and then she came back, and it happened again.
Well, maybe.
You see, he's well, I'll just let it play out.
Just a line full of stealthing dudes. It's just like a science at this point.
I mean, like, I don't know, like I would say most people. Oh shit. I think this is from the person who is the retarded child. They said, I've actually been raped, and saying no just made him rape me harder. I noticed what happened after he pulled out. This is not incomprehensible that I would just walk away from that situation.
So, don't get me wrong, I've definitely laughed at, like, I like laughing at edgy stuff. However, a person was raping me, and I told them no, and then they raped me harder, is, at least to me, not a statement that elicits any kind of humor response. Because it's not really edgy. It's not even like a so dark it's funny type thing, because it's just a thing that happens, and it's also a direct counter to a point that he's made, which is that the woman should have explicitly called out the sexual assault. So this isn't just like, him laughing at a dark thing. This is the counter argument to his point, which unambiguously invalidates the only vestige of an argument that he had. And, well...
I think this is from the person who is the retarded child. They said, I've actually been raped, and saying no just made him rape me harder. I noticed what happened after he pulled out. This is not incomprehensible that I would just walk away from that situation.
It sounds like she needs to stop having casual sex.
So, this was in response to, I've told a person raping me to stop, and they just raped me harder. And his response to this is, she needs to stop having casual sex. So keep in mind, what he's laughing at right here is her doing the thing that he's been spamming on Twitter that she should do. His whole Twitter right now is saying, you should be mature enough to call it out. You should be mature enough to call it out. You should be mature enough to call it out. And then, oh, wait, it turns out, forehead just calling out the rape as it's happening isn't always as easy as it sounds. And his response to that isn't just to laugh. It's to then say, maybe she should stop having sex. As though she's just some kind of rape magnet, and it's just her fault for being alive. Being quiet about it, then it's her fault if they rape her. Being loud about it, well, sucks to suck. That's his argument. Again, to people who are fans of Destiny who feel like I'm being uncharitable, That literally is the argument. That's not an uncharitable reading or an optical dunk. That's just straightforwardly what he's saying. I don't know how else you could really read that. I mean, he just said that. So, yeah. Because I know his community is going to assume that this is all some sort of big, protracted optical battle. But this is one of the things that people make fun of debate bros for treating every issue like some kind of sports battle, you know? For treating every issue like, well, it's not about the real world consequences of these subjects and the results that discussing them elicit. It's instead about how expertly you can argue your point. And I know Destiny has had a habit of taking positions he doesn't actually believe in order to argue more competently for them than his opposition can argue against them, which I acknowledge there's a fun in that, and it's not as though I haven't done things adjacent to that. Obviously, you know, the Socratic method can tend a little close to that, depending on how you want to frame it or present that argument. But I feel like at this point, it's pretty clear, especially given the fact that Destiny has talked fairly responsibly about sexual assault before, that the reason he's behaving this way is because rationality isn't what's guiding his behavior. I'm really sorry if this is getting tiring, but it's spite, guys. It's just spite. That's it. It's a perfect argument for how contextual intelligence can be. You can be the smartest guy in the room, but if smarts aren't what's leading your behavior, then this is what you get.
Dude, come on! Don't do that. Don't fucking do that.
This shit is fucking ridiculous. I'm sorry. Get the fuck out of here with this.
Get the fuck out of here with this stupid shit. Because she said that before she had been raped, and telling the rapist no made him rape her harder. Get out of here.
No. Fucking shit. Like, every single time I walk anywhere, I'm just getting raped 50 million fucking times. She's not. Stop fucking the same rapist over and over again.
She's not fucking the same rapist. It happened with 3 different people. And like,
Then stop having sex. He was going to say, then stop having sex. If men keep raping you, stop having sex. You're at fault. If you tell them to stop and they rape you more, you're at fault. If you don't tell them to stop and they rape you, you're at fault. No matter what happens, what we really need to talk about is how the rape victim is the person who made this all happen. And keep in mind, he's not saying rape isn't bad here. I can hear the defenders making that claim. He's not saying rape isn't bad. He's just levying the weight of its occurrence upon the people who it hurts. It's entirely possible to be a rape apologist while still believing, at least in the most explicit terms, that rape is bad. In fact, oftentimes some of the worst rape apologists are people who do think that rape is bad. The issue here isn't whether or not rape is bad. The issue here is who you're spending your time on Earth blaming for it. Keep in mind, this isn't just like a what air you're giving to which arguments perspective. The things he said there are empirically incorrect. His arguments are wrong. They're inarguable, even, because he essentially created a no way out situation. If you say something, you're wrong. If you didn't say something, you're wrong. Anything to avoid the obvious statement, the only reasonable thing you can say in the situation, which is, don't rape. That's it. That is genuinely it. That's it. That's the thing that we should be talking about. Because remember, no matter what you do to protect yourself, we are always potentially victims. All of us, not just women. I say, women can be victimized by rape, and it is generally women when you're outside of prisons, but it could be anyone. You can be the strongest guy. You can be careful. You can keep a weapon on you at all times. You can be selective. At the end of the day, not even staying inside of your house and living as a hikikomori will completely insulate you from the possibility of being sexually assaulted. In the incredibly rare occurrence of a break-in rape, which is a thing that can happen, I suppose. But given the fact that rape can always take place, as long as there are people willing to or capable of doing it. And given the fact that no series of preparations can completely protect somebody, and how conversations about what a victim could have done better will never amount to anything other than stigmatizing being a victim. Because keep in mind, like, as much as I'm abstracting this conversation, there is a real person here, right here, who has been raped multiple times, and a massive public figure is laughing at them. Literally laughing, as the circumstances of their rape are detailed. That is the consequence of this line. We trade technical correctness. Not even, because he's technically incorrect. He's incorrect on every level. Technically, semantically, morally, there's no avenue through which his behavior here is defensible, but we trade the perception of technical correctness for real world harm. And that's obviously, well, if Destiny was a utilitarian, he would understand why that's a bad thing. I don't have, that much to pull from this, because the general lesson that I'm trying to work through here is something that I think you guys probably already understand, which is why it's wrong to victim blame and wrong to engage in rape apologia, as Destiny has unquestionably done here. I have no doubt that his community, some little bits of it will take serious issue, but most of them are probably going to run through the same cycle that always happens when Destiny has a really bad take, which is he will hyperbolize his position, make humorous and not optically, rhetorically well-delivered arguments against the people who take issue with what he's said. He'll ban a great many people who criticize him from his community, and the people who weren't loud enough with their criticisms will be quiet, they'll stick around, and in a month it'll just be some other thing. So I don't imagine that much is going to change in that avenue, but I hope to anyone who disagrees with me generally, like, I hope you understand, it's not just an optics thing. Like, it's not just that he's wrong in a way that stupid people are often wrong. The technical errors that he's making in his argument are, I think, evident and would be to a high schooler. Now, don't get me wrong. I feel like if you put a high schooler against Destiny in a debate on this subject, Destiny would rhetorically come out on top, because Destiny has spent a decade learning how to do this. And as a person myself who's fairly okay at this, who has talked to people with a much greater degree of education, who are probably a good bit smarter than me, I can say that rhetoric can carry you a good deal where correctness cannot. But in terms of the actual legitimacy of these arguments, like the validity of them, a high schooler would trash Destiny on this. A middle schooler, possibly, with a very minimal level of sex education, could trash Destiny on this. This is why I made the joke about intellectually outpacing him. Because you can be as smart as you like, but again, when smarts aren't dictating your behavior, not dictating your tweets, not dictating what you're arguing, not dictating what you believe, because a lot of what he's saying right now runs contrary to stuff he's said in the past, then intelligence just isn't a factor, you know? You might as well be using intelligence to judge a person by how effectively they can climb a tree. Not entirely invalid, trying to find the right-handed footholds, but probably not the main thing doing the work there. Could be spite, or athleticism.